Live from the pitch pad in New York City. Get ready to unleash your inner entrepreneur with Pitch Live with Amy Summers. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just dipping your toes into the Shark Tank, this is the place to be to discover how to turn your pitch into reality. Fasten your seatbelts, pitch stars, because the spotlight is on you and we are about to make success happen. Get ready for Pitch Live in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Pitch Live. I'm your host, Amy Summers, founder and president of Pitch Publicity and Anisivox. I'm also a hardworking entrepreneur who is passionate about helping you reach success in any area of your life. And I know that is possible after decades of experience in perfecting the pitch and enhancing communication skills, which is why I'm so happy to be joined today by Shelley Spector, who is co-founder of the Museum of Public Relations, which is based right here in New York City, and is the only PR museum in the world. Is that right, Shelley? Do I have that right?
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Shelley is an icon in public relations industry, and I first had the privilege of meeting her in 2022 when we were researching and planning a progressive era themed event for Pitch Publicity, my PR agency, to honor the father of modern public relations, Rockefeller's first publicist, and the man who developed the original press release, Mr. Ivy Lee. And that's how I found Shelley, and she helped us research for that event. And she also gave a presentation to our guests about the influence that Ivy Lee had on the profession of public relations. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I learned so much about you, actually, as we were researching Ivy Lee.
Oh, no.
And I'm captivated by your career story. So I want to get right into it and dissect how you made success happen, or as we call it on this show, MSH, in doing different roles in PR. You've had a very diverse background. You've had corporate. You've also been an entrepreneur. But before we get into all your entrepreneurial endeavors, can you tell us what led you to a career in public relations? And at what point did you realize that public relations was going to involve a lot of pitching?
Oof. I knew nothing about public relations when I came out of school. I got my undergrad degree in journalism, and I was an editor for the newspaper on campus. And I was also a writer for the school's public relations office. And then I went on to get my master's degree at Newhouse at Syracuse, and that was in broadcast journalism. So I came back to the city. I'm from the city, to try to get a job as a writer for a TV radio station, and I just couldn't. I found out years later that it was because I was a woman, and I had never directly experienced that up front. So my only choice back then was to go and look at public relations. I had some experience in that. And one thing I really liked about PR when I first looked at what this firm was doing, that I eventually wound up at, was the diversity of what you do every single day. I mean, you must do 67 things and you never know. You walk in, you just never know what's up. The phone's going to ring. Could that be a potential new business client? You're talking to the press one minute, you're having ideas, you're presenting for new business. I mean, you're always doing different things every minute. It is the last thing that PR is boring.
It's like communications triage.
Yeah, exactly. It just keeps your adrenaline going. And for me, it was a great playing field for having ideas. And that's what I have always enjoyed the most, is coming up with new ideas. I was doing this in elementary school and throughout high school, college. I was always coming up with new ideas for things. I didn't realize it was a trend until years later, but coming up with ideas is just something that I love to do. And it happens very naturally.
I have to ask this. I can't let you just put that out there. But what was an idea that you remember in elementary school that you came up with?
I came up with, there was some bad feelings in the 4th grade among one group of kids and another group of kids. And I said, why don't I start a newsletter And I started a newsletter. I typed it out myself. I had my friend Robin draw the illustrations, and we try to put it out every month. I would interview people. I never, nobody taught me how to do this, but I would interview kids over here, kids over here. I would talk about birthday parties.
Well, you were like a
I,
crusader for mental health back in the fourth grade.
I always thought that communications can solve a lot of problems. I guess I knew that intuitively.
So take me to that first job. What were you doing in that role? You said you worked at a PR agency. What did they have you do?
Okay. Well, first, it should be said that I was the first professional woman in that office. And this was investor relations for financial services companies. I knew nothing. I knew nothing about business, financial services. I didn't know how banks made money. And I just made sure I read the paper every day, business pages. I followed the stock market. I would participate with the guys when they were talking about finance or even sports. I had to fit in. They didn't know what to make of me because to them, women in the office were all the secretaries. And I remember a very important moment. I was standing at the door where I could see the whole office, and I saw all the women who were secretaries, remember, right? At one side, and all the men in the windowed offices over here. This was in Rockefeller Center. And I said, where do I belong? I don't even know what to wear. I mean, I can't dress like a guy. I can't dress like the secretaries. And who am I? I mean, I had nobody. It wasn't like there was an organization that had working women that you could just. Well, I didn't know about PRSA, but I knew there were no role models back
I
then.
feel like you just described the opening scene of Mad Men when you walk in and you have all the women over here, and you're like Elizabeth Moss walking in and not knowing where to go.
Well, let me tell you that I identify very strongly with Peggy, very, from her trying, her drinking with the guys, and her not knowing where she stood, and her differentiating herself from Joan and the other secretaries with the basket of kisses. And she just came up with that idea, and the guys were going, wow, who came up with that? And then they begrudgingly put her on the account. So, and that was her start. And I look back, and that's kind of what I did, except I didn't have lipsticks as my client. I had banks and an energy company. So I had to learn all this stuff. So I took myself to banking school at night. I paid for it myself because I thought this field, this niche field, was very intellectually interesting to me, much more so than product.
So what was your first idea that you really recall that was like a major pitching moment when you pitched something at the office?
From that first job?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, should I I'll tell a shortened version of the story. I heard that the company was doing something called coal liquefaction. And this was during the middle of the oil crisis in the 70s or right after it. And this was if this company figured out how to melt coal and make it into oil, that would be a great thing. So I wanted to explain this to a mainstream audience. Now, remember, I'm only 23 at this point, and I wrote out a whole storyboard for how we can do a video of this, even though there wasn't video back then, or film of this. And I sent it to 60 Minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Wait, did your boss know that you sent it to 60 Minutes?
yeah,
Okay.
he said this is just a great idea because it's a very visual story. It connects to a national problem, international problem right now, and the greater public needs to understand how this works.
This is like original B-roll.
Yes, I would call it that.
Or if people don't know what that is, it's like it stands for beta roll, but it's what you would give TV stations. We don't even call it that anymore. Well, they do sometimes. But it's what you give TV stations as like background footage for a story.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. And here I took a big leap in sending it to, of all places, 60 Minutes, because I figured let them turn it down and then I'll go somewhere else. Now, how I had the nerve to send it to the executive producer, because I found his name in the direct. Yeah. And I sent it to him, and his secretary called me up a week later, and said, he wants to have lunch with you.
Oh, this is back in the day when you got a lunch invitation.
Well, yes. And I was too naive to realize that what he really wanted was not to learn more about coal liquefaction.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But I was pitching the idea to him, and then he said, I got us a hotel room.
Oh, this is like Mad
yeah.
Men.
I know. It's very much like,
You were
much like,
in Mad Men.
totally. I mean, this is
Wow.
the stuff that happened. And I was so, I was taken aback. I was very naive. I didn't know stuff like this happens because, as I said, I didn't have any female peers in the business. And, but I was sure about that idea. And I saw that he wasn't really interested in it, which is a real tragedy to me. And I then pitched it to other places. But that was a big leap for somebody in my shoes back then. I would never expect a 23-year-old who's very new to the business to come up with an idea like that and then to go to 60 Minutes with it.
Who ended up covering the story? Do you remember?
We ended up getting it in the Energy Trades, Oil and Gas Journal, and that kind of thing, which was really kind of course, he could have gotten it into there, but the client was happy with that.
That's amazing. Now let's move a little bit more forward into your career. I'm sure you got to the point eventually when you were managing other people on your team. How do you teach someone how to pitch? Because this is something that comes up a lot. In school, you learn how to write press releases and you learn how to write pitches, but there's not really a class. I mean, they try to do the best they can, like have these mock situations, but it's just not the same as like calling up the executive producer at 60 Minutes and having him invite you to his hotel room. I mean, you can't assimilate that. So how did you, once you got into more manager roles, how did you teach people how to have the confidence to pitch ideas?
By believing in the idea of what you're pitching. You can't you can't fake the excitement. And if you don't have the excitement for this idea, it's not going to work. The reporter's going to hear it in your voice. And he wants to hear how this is new, how this is the first. You got to keep saying those words. How is this newsworthy? How are your viewers going to like this story? You've got to know, and it's a very important other point, is that you need to know what that reporter has written recently. And so you refer back to something that he has written recently and say, I thought you would be interested because of your story recently about the energy crisis. Well, my client, who is so-and-so energy company, has a new way of creating oil out of coal.
I think you make such a strong point, and it's something we always say, but I think, you really uncover why that needs to be done. I mean, you need to research who you're pitching, whether it's a journalist or whether it's a client. I mean, I can tell you many times I've had even students come apply for internship at Pitch Publicity, and they didn't even like look at my website. They know nothing about me.
Right.
So it's kind of like when you're going to someone and you're trying to convince them to do something, whether it's to hire you or to take your story or to be a client, not knowing anything about them, it's very difficult. And I think just even if you just know one thing, if you could just say, maybe you did minimal research and you say, I really, liked that post you posted the other day on Instagram. It made me feel this way. I mean, now you have their attention, because otherwise I think most people are going into it with, here comes another pitch, and it's the same thing. It's not tailored to me.
Well, let me tell you, reporters really don't like when PR people call them cold and pitch them. They especially don't like it if they have no interest and they saw that the PR person did not do any research. Listen, back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have the internet. You had to go and research this guy. You only had old newspapers, right? And Business Week and Forbes. you didn't have anything online. Today, it couldn't be any easier, right? Google the guy's
So
name or the
easy.
woman's name.
I tell young professionals all that. I'm like, you're so lucky. Like, we didn't have these resources, like you said. I mean, there had to be something, out there already about them. And people weren't as public as they are now. I mean, it's so easy to find information.
Yeah, absolutely. And to not do it is, I would lose respect for that PR person immediately.
So we're talking about pitching journalists, which I think we could have a whole series of shows with Shelley about. But you also have entrepreneurism in your blood, and we talk a lot about entrepreneurism on this show. So I want to shift a little bit and kind of start in those beginning stages of course, you started being an entrepreneur in grade school, as we found out with your newsletter. But I remember you telling a story when I was at your museum about how you had pitched a major hotel chain, NBC Suites, on an idea. How did that come about? What happened that prompted you to do that? And then what was the result of it?
I hope my kids aren't listening to this. So I'll tell you I'll tell you the real story. Uh, I was working. I had two kids in the middle of everything. I was very, very busy at work. I was working at a mid-sized firm at this point. I met my husband, and a month later, wait, I met my husband later that week. I met Edward Bernays. It was almost the same week. I got promoted. I was handling this big account group of financial services, and got pregnant. And that's you should do a show about being pregnant in the office. I have a lot to say about that. Had the baby, went right back to work because we didn't have maternity leave, had another baby, went to another firm. Then I went to another firm after that was closer to home. Because remember, I live in Jersey, but I never saw my kids. And that was the thing. I felt terrible. I was traveling all the time. And I said, enough is enough. I'm going to work from home. I'm going to be a consultant in the bedroom. I had a fax machine. That was it, my only equipment. I guess I had a
You're a
computer.
pioneer in remote work, Shelley.
Maybe. And so we decided that the week between leaving that job and actually starting this new firm, we were going to take our kids on vacation. They were then 2 and 3 years old. And I just figured, well, they're walking now. They speak a little. It's a good time to take them. They're old enough. And for anybody who's ever traveled with toddlers, you really got to think about this first. And bring along an extra person, by the way. You should, it was just because the kids had never been away like that before. They'd never been on a plane, and they're constantly being restrained from doing what kids do. When we finally got to the hotel, my son immediately went under this glass coffee table and popped out the glass. Remember, he's 2. And he starts running up to me saying, Mommy, Mommy, look. And I could fast forward and see his head going through the glass, which it didn't do. And I'm trying to get his sticky little fat fingers off of this without breaking the glass. And then my daughter goes and fills up a glass with water, but puts it in the microwave, which is her eye level, my knee level. And all this stuff is happening while my husband is learning how to change the temperature in the room with the bellman, because that's what husbands do. Right. That's what husband. I don't understand it, but everybody tells me that my husband is not unusual in that respect. This is what husbands do. But I'm the one who's running after these 2 kids who had finally been let out of their cage, so to speak. And then I said to Barry, my husband, where's the diaper bag? And he said, I gave it to you at the airport. And I said, no, I gave it to you. So now we're without diapers. And my son is 2. So that night we had to go out driving through West Palm Beach looking for a 7-Eleven to buy diapers. And I remember I actually called down to the front desk. I said, you don't happen to have diapers, do you? And they laughed at me. They said, no, we have shaving cream, we have toothbrush, we have, all this other stuff. And we got back to the hotel and the kids were exhausted. We put them to bed. And Barry and I said, maybe there's an idea here. Maybe this is a marketing opportunity. So that night we stayed up the whole night. And, back then there was no PowerPoint and they just had these little embassy suite pads. And I wrote out, like you'd call it a proto PowerPoint, with objective strategies. It was a whole big idea that was kind of writing itself, making the world's first childproof hotel.
So you weren't at the bar writing your idea on a cocktail napkin, as we always hear. You were at the embassy suites with your young children running around causing chaos and using that notepad that they always leave in there.
Exactly. And then I said, this is an idea waiting to happen. And, we couldn't believe that we would be the first, that nobody else had tried this before. So the next morning on my way to tennis, I happened to have this pad with me in case I saw the manager of the hotel. And sure enough, I asked somebody if that guy over there in the suit, only guy wearing a suit was the manager. He said, yes. I introduced myself. And I said, if you have 5 minutes, I just want to give you an idea that may help you with your family business. And I told him the idea. He was just very stone cold looking. When you're pitching a prospective client and they don't make any reaction, you just don't know how to, what's going on in his head. And the first thing he said to me was, when can we hold the press conference? And I said, oh my God, we sold the idea. But then, oh my God, again, I said to myself, we don't have a company. We don't have people. We don't have an office. We don't have money. And we just went with it and set this whole thing up. I personally trained waiters on how to deal with a 3-year-old at a table. You don't serve, you don't put a bottle of ketchup in front of a 2-year-old boy. You don't put a steak knife in front of a 3-year-old girl. These kind of very common sense things that waiters are not trained to do. I taught housekeepers how to crawl on the floor and look for hazards, yada, yada, yada. When we had the press conference, all the travel agents of Palm Beach County were there, and they gave us a standing ovation, which I'd never seen at a press conference. And it turns out that the CEO of Embassy Suites was right there. And he said, I'd like you to do this for the rest of the country.
Wow. So is this what prompted your own business then? Was this initial idea? Because you had to put together a company to have someone write the check to, right?
Exactly. So suddenly I didn't tell anyone we didn't have a company. We just went ahead.
Of course not.
And made a company, got space. And we had gone down there in March, and this was June. And in that time, we had a couple of people that I had known from past jobs, and we started it. And then 2 years later, we decided to apply for the Creativity and Public Relations Award, which was the predecessor to the Sabre Awards. And we hardly could scrape together enough people to fit around a table. I mean, we're sitting at the next table is Hill and Knowlton, next table is Burson, next table is Weber Shandwick, and then there's Spector Associates. Nobody knows who we are. And when it came to the Travel and Leisure Award, Hall Holmes, you may know that name, announced, and it's Spector Associates Travel and Leisure. And right after that, he said, and the best of show for tonight, the gold sipper goes to Spector Associates. So now I'm holding these two very, very heavy glass trophies.
Glass. How ironic. Glass. You ended up.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Glass. Yes. The whole thing.
Exactly. Yes. Glass plays heavily into that story. So it was, I couldn't believe it was happening. I could not believe it was happening.
Well, that's amazing. And I think there's one thing that you said I just want to make a point of, because people say this all the time. They say, oh, I had the idea for Reese's peanut butter cups because I used to always put chocolate and peanut butter together, but somebody else made a lot of money out of it. You mentioned that you couldn't believe that nobody else had this idea, but I assure you there were other people that probably that probably had the idea. The difference was that you and your husband had the gumption to actually put that idea on paper, and with not even fully knowing what you were getting yourself into. I mean, you had the courage just to, without an appointment even, just walk up and pitch this. And I think that that is very inspiring, and also shows that sometimes we get caught up in the formality of things, like, oh, we have to make an appointment or something. But a lot of times these things happen just by being at the right place at the right time, but
That's
also
right.
being fearless in how you're doing it.
And it all, again, comes down to believing in that idea,
Mhm.
right? Now, if I was an 80-year-old man pitching that idea, that wouldn't be appropriate. I was a young mother. I had 2 little kids there. I'm talking about personal experience. This guy was also a father. And I'm showing him how my experience can translate into more bookings for that hotel. So it was a direct line
His
between.
language, you're speaking his language because you're the target audience. And on top of that, you were also, you knew how to get to him because you were talking about his bottom line at the same time.
Exactly.
Now, Shelley, I really have to watch my time with you because literally we could talk for hours. But before we wind down, I really want to get to a current day story and what you're doing today, because I just find it so fascinating that you started this museum for public relations. And you had mentioned a name before when you were starting out in this story that some of our audience may not know who Edward Bernays is. But he is very prestigious in the PR profession, and he was really the impetus, I think, for you starting the museum. Can you tell our audience who he is, and what insightful encounter happened that you said yes to that really started the museum?
Well, what it was not was Barry and I sitting down and saying, hey, let's take our $1 million and invest it in a museum for public relations because the world needs a public relations museum. That's not what happened at all. We got to be friends with Edward Bernays, who lived up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I knew who everybody in PR at the time knew who he was. He was considered and still is considered the father of PR. But Ivy Lee, in his own way, is maybe the other father of PR. PR is lucky to have 2 fathers. And Bernays is also the double nephew of Sigmund Freud. And we would go up to his house starting in 1986 until 3-4 times a year until his death in March of 1985. And every time we go up, we do oral history. These oral histories are now on the internet by whoever used in the them. And one day when he, at his 101st birthday party, I said, what are you going to do with all this when you leave? Because this was a mansion and every inch was an 8 by 8.5 by 11 or 8 by 10 picture of Bernays with this guy or Bernays with Eleanor Roosevelt, Bernays with Freud. You know, it itself looked like a museum. So and he said to me he wanted to create a museum out of his home as his uncle Freud had done in London. It was actually Freud's daughters who had done that. And I said, what kind of museum? He said, a museum of public relations. I said, you know, maybe that kind of museum belongs in New York and not up in Cambridge. I just don't think people are going to come up here. And he said, would you build such a museum? And I said, yes, we will build the museum. We will create the Museum of Public Relations in New York. We made that promise to him. So
So he
after he
pitched you,
died,
basically. He pitched you on the idea.
I guess I didn't, you know, it was very obvious that this is what he wanted
Mhm,
and that he had even been thinking about it, which we didn't know.
mhm.
If we
And
had thought about
and that he trusted you. I mean, you're not family, and, I really like that, you know, you kinda went by it really fast, but there was a relationship that was building there as you were visiting him. Did you know what you were getting into as you were doing this, or were you just thinking, "Hey, we're just gonna get a bunch of videos and just get this oral history done?"
we built a relationship with him. He was the most fascinating man I've ever met in my life. Because he was growing older, he was in his 90s when we met him. We never knew when it was going to be the last time we met him. There was always something to learn from him. And yes, he did tell the same story over and over sometimes, but we would learn new things. I mean, this was a man walking out of another century, and as somebody who played a role in most major events in the 20th century, often behind the scenes. So he was so interesting. We got so much on tape. We just developed a very close relationship with him and his family, so that when he died, the family called us and said, come pick out the stuff you'd like to show at the museum. So one day we drove up there, and along with the librarian from the Library of Congress, whatever she didn't want, we took.
Well, this seems like a very interesting to me because I'm in PR, but can also be maybe perhaps a very difficult pitch. You're pitching the Museum of Public Relations. What is your pitch when you're pitching potential donors or you're pitching media about it? If you're pitching people outside of our universe that gets really excited about PR, because other people don't have such a great impression of PR people. But what is your pitch to say that a museum is needed for public relations?
Well, we generally pitch for prospective donors, other PR people. I cannot imagine explaining all this to somebody outside the field. Honestly, I haven't even tried that yet. But everybody in PR knows about, what other people think of it. And I tell them that this is a museum to show the world what we do, build public appreciation for our field. We really need it. And within the field, to build appreciation for all the diverse people we have and the diverse people we don't yet have. And so through the years, we've gotten bigger and bigger in the kinds of things that we do. So we are a nonprofit 501c3 educational institution. We work with colleges around the world, and we do most of our work for free, and we need the industry to support us.
Well, I really want to commend you, Shelley, and your husband, Barry, for taking on this monumental task in our industry. Is truly a legacy thing that you are building for the industry. And I mean, even when I went to school and told my parents I was going to major in PR, they were horrified because they didn't know what that was. And that was in the late 90s. So I think we
Yeah.
continue to have this problem of people not really understanding the profession. And when I look at the work that you're doing through the museum, I really see that as you're really helping PR professionals communicate what we do, because I think, sometimes the people that are best at their job are worse at, how they dress themselves. And so one of the things that you're really doing for the profession is you're not only just preserving all this history, but you're helping preserve that messaging of why communications is so important, who needs it, and why it needs to remain accessible in this world as things are rapidly changing all the time. We will never not need communications, and so I thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
My pleasure.
What's the best way for our Pitch Live community to connect with you and the Museum of PR? And what would you pitch to the audience to come and see at the Museum of PR?
Yes, we'll make an appointment to come down in person. That's the best way. Or if you're in a class or you're in a department and you'd like to do a group virtual tour, we do that as well, free of charge. If you want to write to me, I'm Shelley Spector at prmuseum.org. We have a website, prmuseum.org, and on there it lists all the calendar of events for every year.
And they have fantastic events, and a lot of them are on Zoom, so they're accessible to anybody that wants to watch them. I've even watched some making dinner in my kitchen, and so it's really nice to be able to pop in whenever. But Shelley, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that your stories have inspired me, so I know that they have inspired so many people, and your career journey is absolutely so impressive. I want to encourage everyone to share this episode so we can get more people exposed to the work that Shelley is doing at the Museum of Public Relations. And be sure to attend, some of these webinars that they have. They're free and empowering, and there's opportunities to do so every single month. So just go to prmuseum.org And thank you for joining us on the Pitch Live with Amy Summers. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and give us a rating or review. Your feedback really helps us plan future episodes. And I hope that you were inspired today by Shelley and her incredible career of communications and entrepreneurism. And as a bonus, join us at anisivox.com, where you can get motivated and hone your communication skills, binge as much mentorship as you want. I wish I could just wrap up Shelley and keep her as my mentor in my home all the time, because I know I learned so much from you. But thank you again, Shelley, for being on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. Well, until next time, everyone, keep making that success happen.